Well, now to our main purpose of our meeting tonight. Delegate Comstock is agreed to join us as part of our effort to have our local legislators come in from time to time. Delegate Comstock probably doesn't need too much of an introduction by now. She was elected in 2009 and re-elected in 2011. Her bio is out by the front door. If you haven't seen it yet, she's a 30-year resident of McLean, a member of a number of important committees down in Richmond. I'm sure she'll tell us about all of their work. Graduate of Middlebury College and received a law degree from Georgetown University. So I'll leave it at that, and I hope you'll all give Delegate Barbara Comstock a warm welcome to Great Falls.
Thanks. Good evening. Great to be with you here tonight. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Great Falls Citizens Association and community. We have had a busy year this year, and I always appreciate working with you all because we had accomplished so much over the past few years, from starting with our, I think it was the very first meeting that I had was with the Great Falls Citizens Association when we met over in Reston, I think is where they dragged us to talk about the two-lane turn onto Georgetown Pike. And I know Stu Mendelson was there, who had been battling this way back when, and a lot of you were here, and Eric and Joan on the Transportation Committee worked with us, and John Faust, and we all initially, when this happened, everybody told me, this is not going to work, this is not going to turn around, we're stuck with this, and VDOT just doesn't listen to us. But we really got together as a community, worked together, and now we have a new official at VDOT that we work with all the time, and we're able to have quite a bit of difference here with how we're working together and really listening to the community, working with the community, and most importantly, when you look at things like this, working with the expertise of the community. I know Garrett Moore really appreciates and knows the expertise from this group. So I have always appreciated it. I know he does, and we're going to continue to be able to work with you on these issues like widening Route 7 and all of the issues that we're going to have to be dealing with in Tyson's Corner. But this year in the session, as we have over the past 2 years, what we focused on was what we've really needed to focus on since I first started there, which was jobs, because jobs has been our top priority. We continue to be #1 in the country for jobs because that has been our #1 focus. We were also named the #1 place to make a living this year. And that was because this has been our focus, because we know if we don't keep the jobs coming in here, if we don't get our unemployment rates down, if we don't get our underemployment rates, turned around, because that's a big issue too, underemployment, people who might be employed and working and bringing in some income, but it's not what it used to be, or families where you had 2 jobs that are now 1, or families who had a job, but they now are working on their own and they're independent contractors, and they're waiting for that economy to come back. So we've been very focused on that. So one of the first bills that I started working on actually last fall was a bill to make sure we keep the data center industry here. And the data center industry, if you don't know about it, is an industry that's pretty strong here in Virginia because we are sort of the center and the hub of the internet. You have all the data coming through here. We have AOL, we have all these technology companies. We have really the model technology council here, the Northern Virginia Technology Council, that I'm proud to work with all the time. I'm a member, and I've worked with technology companies for years in my private sector business, and we worked with them on their priorities, and one of their top priorities was this data center bill. Now, it had been introduced before and failed, so we started working together and seeing what parties we needed to get together and what kind of coalitions we need to form. So we, sometime last fall, got a whole coalition of Northern Virginia colleagues here to go over and visit one of our local data centers here in Loudon, and just so that everyone would see what was going on here and the kind of jobs they can bring here, because these are huge buildings that store all kinds of computer databases, and the result of this being a huge, big real estate piece of property is they bring in great local taxes because they cover a huge amount of ground. Building them and setting them up requires a lot of technical expertise, has a lot of jobs on the front end when they're built, but then it's a great resource for us to be able to get a lot of money that stays right here in Fairfax. Doesn't have to go down to Richmond, because those property taxes that they're paying stay here and help our schools and help our roads and help our communities meet the needs that we have here. So that data center bill was made a change in how we were treating the tax treatment of data centers. Because what was happening is, because this is a competitive business, and other states were changing their tax treatment of these data centers. And instead of taxing each individual server, I won't bore you with the complicated details on this, but we were taxing it in a very 19th century way instead of a 21st century way. So we said, this doesn't make sense. If we want to have a 21st century economy, we need to start changing our tax code to a 21st century economy and welcome these jobs. So we were able, again, to, kind of like what we did here on the two-lane turn, we turned around the expectations totally. And from having this bill die in committee, and not only got out of the committee, it had strong bipartisan support with the committee chairman, as well as our entire caucus, pretty much the entire Northern Virginia caucus, and it passed overwhelmingly, and the governor just signed it last week. And as a result of that, we're going to see more. This is a business that's going to grow by hundreds of millions of dollars. And we want Virginia to be the #1 destination. And now we're going to continue to promote it. The governor's coming up here to visit one of our sites. We're going to have a big get-together with the entire community to make sure they know we are open for business and keeping this business a strong industry for us. Another bill that we did for the Northern Virginia technology community is we have a capital gains exemption for new businesses that come in here and start new technology businesses, small businesses, just getting started, so we can have the next Facebook, the next Yahoo, the next eBay coming here to Virginia. And if they're successful and they employ our citizens and they provide revenue here and they sell and they're successful, we're not going to be taxing them on capital gains. So this was a bill that we had passed back in 2010, but we wanted to extend it further. So on this bill, I worked with Senator Mark Herring, a Democrat from Loudoun County, and we got this bill again passed. There had been some Democrat opposition to it back when it was first put in place, but we were able to, really by going around and telling the story of the kind of businesses this was bringing in, how this was changing our local economy, we were able to get that bipartisan support, and Mark and I, again, were able to get that overwhelmingly passed. And then a telework bill that I also worked with the technology community on was, again, a second bill that I passed on telework, building on the bill that I passed last year, where we want to be able to encourage companies to use telework. And this is a great, again, 21st century job solution that allows people to, it's a win-win for companies to be able to adapt to their employees' schedules and allow them to work from home or work closer to home, to have staggered schedules, but not have to get in the car every day, battle the traffic. And we know if we can have companies, we can have individuals who can just stay home one day a week or one day every 10 days, it makes a big difference in transportation. So we already have 174 companies that have taken advantage of the telework tax credit bill that we passed last year. And again, we wanted to extend that and be able to get more companies involved. We haven't set up a lot of really strict rules on it because we want companies to come in here and innovate and really show us different ways that different industries can find good telework solutions that really match their employees. I know it's something that I hear a lot from working moms, that this is a great solution for them, because oftentimes with a lot of the professionals we have around here, there's no reason that you need to be in the office to work on a research paper. You know, Bill works with the Congressional Research Service, and Congressman Wolf, back when we were working on the Hill and pushing this bill, we were trying to get a lot of the Congressional, we were really pushing it on the Hill to let Congressional Research Service people who are doing research be able to do some of that at home. Because if you have your databases and you have your computers and you're having to write one of those great long papers that you write, and I tend to read Bill sometimes because he works on a lot of good things, you can do that at home. There's no reason you need to drive down to have your boss see you typing at the computer. If you're turning in that paper on time, if you're doing what you need to do, you know, that's the measure. The results in what you do is what you want to have judged, not whether you're sitting there in front of your boss all day. So Congressman Wolf has been pushing that for years, and I was doing that back in the early 90s with him. it took, Virginia, even though a lot of companies are doing this, we hadn't passed a bill on this. And again, this was something where we were really able to turn around the conventional wisdom, get this passed last year, and again on a good, strong bipartisan basis, pass it again this year. And then we had a lot of other business bills that deal with things all around the state, but those were the particular ones that I focused on. Obviously, different areas down in our ports and down in Hampton Roads and Virginia Beach area. We have a lot of things where we're trying to expand trade there. The governor's been on a number of trade missions, and we're really working to make sure we can bring a lot of businesses in there. We maximize the use of our ports, and we really have an integrated economy. Because one of our big concerns is that with the downsizing of the federal government and the changes there, we want to be able to diversify our economy and not suffer when that's changing. And I've worked with a lot of people in the defense community to make sure we keep a lot of that defense business here, first of all. Then we also don't have it go into government jobs, but we keep it outside where we have a lot of the expertise and a lot of the flexibility. And if you have people in our companies on the outside working and contracting with the Defense Department, they can then be force multipliers on jobs out in the private sector, not take all those jobs and take them in-house, where you end up having a lot more legacy costs with pensions or actually the federal government has revised that. They have 401ks. But we want to make sure that our defense contracting industry stays in the private sector, where we know they have such a good multiplier force into a lot of other private sector jobs, not just jobs that are dependent on the federal government. So, and then moving into the transportation area, we had a number of bills there. I had a bill that I think it was Fairfax County or VDOT who asked me to put in, which is really it's a small VDOT management issue, but we haven't, when people come to the scene of an accident, if the VDOT folks got there first to move the accident, they weren't allowed to do that until the police got there. So now we allow them to drive on the medians, drive along the edge so that they can get to that accident, get it cleared quickly. Because when accidents aren't cleared quickly, you can imagine out on the Beltway with all the construction we have going on, it costs people time, a lot of money, and there are millions in wasted dollars. So, somebody within VDOT had looked at that and said, this is costing us millions of dollars, let's just change that simple rule. We got that changed. We also did something that we've been working on for the past couple of years that we had passed in the House, but it kept getting killed in the Senate, but we were able to get it through this year, which was a bill, pretty simple concept, which you think we were already doing, but we weren't, which was to rank our transportation projects based on congestion relief and economic benefits, so that we know what projects and how much they cost will relieve the most congestion. So that we, as we're picking and choosing where we're going to move forward, we do it with the most economic bang for our buck, with the most congestion relief, so that we then that will again be a multiplier force to use the next transportation dollar better, because we know it'll be bringing in jobs, will relieve that transportation congestion, and then we'll be able to have more economic growth that in turn will give us more resources to use. So that's something that was one of those good ideas that we had gotten a couple of years ago. Jim Lemunyon, the local delegate, and I had talked to a VDOT employee who said, we've got the technology, they just aren't using it. We can run these, nobody's doing it. So we actually had to pass a bill to make them do it. And now it's in place, and that will certainly help an area like ours where congestion relief is a big issue. And then I worked on a fairly large bill that the governor just signed, I believe, over the weekend, which was the Open and Fair Competition in Government Contracting Act, which is designed to provide a level playing field for all Virginia workers to be able to compete to get our transportation projects. We had the situation with the Dulles Rail where we had an individual who's on the board who is a union vice president who had pushed having a union mandate on the project. And regardless of how you feel about the union mandates or not, what we wanted to say, what we said in this bill, because of our concern of having an uneven playing field and having it fixed for union employees when 96% of our employees in Virginia are non-union, we wanted to have a level playing field so everybody could compete. And so what this bill did is just say, Everybody comes to the table equally. You don't get a preference for being a union shop. You don't get a detriment for being a union shop. Everybody competes on the same level playing field. And that way, we have many of our contractors come to us who aren't union shop. We say, listen, sometimes we use unions on a voluntary basis, but if you mandate it, we will be ruled out, we won't be able to compete, and as a result, you won't have as much competition and these projects will cost you more. We had the situation just a few years ago on the Wilson Bridge where Maryland was trying to force us into having a project labor agreement, and people just weren't competing for the project. And at that time, when the president removed, it wasn't by law, but the president did it by executive order, removed the mandate, we were able to bring in a lot more competitors and the prices dropped precipitously and everyone was able to compete. So this bill was designed, again, to be able to have open and free competition to make sure we get all of our, as many Virginia jobs as possible, because when you get more Virginia employees working on these projects, more of that money stays in Virginia. You have, they pay their taxes in Virginia, they buy homes in Virginia, they're eating in our restaurants, working here, and it's going to help our schools and our roads and everything else by having more Virginia jobs here. So given that we have a situation where this is going to be the Dulles Rail project, although this bill applies to all projects, but the Dulles Rail project in particular is going to be one of the most expensive project that we have in Virginia. We wanted to make sure that we control costs on the front end and that we had that open and fair competition so that our tolls will be lower, the cost of the project will be lower, and more Virginia workers will be involved. So I was very happy to see that pass. Unfortunately, that was actually bipartisan. I think we did have a few votes on that. But the reality is unions contribute millions of dollars. And they don't contribute them to, their workers are largely in Maryland and other states. And they wanted to, they were fighting to get the jobs elsewhere. So that was one of those votes in the Senate where the Lieutenant Governor cast the deciding vote, the 21st vote, so now we will have that open and fair competition. Another bill that we had was a bill on water quality and keeping Virginia in the commission on the Potomac River Basin Commission. The governor's budget actually had removed our membership in that commission. And obviously, this district fronts the Potomac River, and so we had some a Republican member of that commission, who is a good friend of mine, came to me last fall and was very concerned about this, and we started working on that and lobbying on that. So a lot of the times what you do is not to necessarily get a bill passed, but you're trying to maybe kill something that's not so good, change something that maybe wasn't as well thought out. And on this water quality issue, we worked together. I worked with Scott Serville, a Democrat who's down in Mount Vernon area, Kay Corey, who's here in Falls Church, and we all worked together and got the parties together. And really what was going on there is that a lot of the governor's staff and administration wasn't really getting the information from the commission that the commission felt was valuable. And there was just a real communication disconnect. So getting the parties together in the room, having both Democrats and Republicans there, telling them, this is really valuable to us, this is valuable to Northern Virginia, bringing, frankly, the speaker. The speaker was very supportive of this, and he wanted to put this back in here. I was able to work with Senator Hanger, who was one of the budget conferees in the Senate, so we were able to work together and get our membership. I put a budget amendment in to get us back into that, and then we were able to get our membership back in the Potomac River Basin, and now work to make that relationship work and be continuous, and make sure that does everything it's supposed to be benefiting for us here. On education issues, one of the first issues that we did work on and kind of passed overwhelmingly in the House was getting rid of the King's Dominion law. I know a lot of our local communities, my husband's cheering for this because actually my husband and his principal at Oakton High School came down last year and I think the year before to lobby on this. And this has been something that for years was actually on a bipartisan basis, unfortunately, kept in place. And really with a change in some of the leadership and people on committees down in Richmond, a number of my colleagues from Loudoun County with young families and people like my speaker who had previously been in support of roads in the Virginia Beach area. That was the area that was most interested in it because of the tourism issue. And we were able to work again with our whole delegation up here in Northern Virginia together. We passed it overwhelmingly in the House. For the first time ever, it got out of the House committee. This had been a bill that was always killed in committee. I never got to vote on it even on the floor before because I wasn't on the Education Committee. But this year we were able to push it through committee, got it to the floor, and I think it was over 76 votes, or it was overwhelming, and of course bipartisan. But then, unfortunately, it met a less welcome fate over in the Senate, where, frankly, it met bipartisan opposition, and strangely enough, bipartisan opposition from Northern Virginia, because Northern Virginia is one of the areas that really suffers the most from this, because you have a situation where a lot of the counties around the state have gotten exemptions. So the exemption has become the rule. More counties than not already can start school whenever they want, earlier. Well, they can start earlier. They don't have to wait till Labor Day. But Fairfax and then sometimes Loudoun, depending on the snow day schedule, has to wait until after Labor Day. Fairfax really suffers the most from this and not being given that choice. But we had a Democrat senator, Senator Barker in Fairfax, who voted against it and worked very strongly against it. And then we had a Republican senator in Loudoun County, Senator Black, who worked against it. We also, unfortunately, had, I'm told, because he worked with Senator Barker for some reason, our Loudoun County superintendent was opposing this. I'm not sure really why on that, but when we passed it out of the House and then the Senate killed their bill, we got over and started trying to lobby more on the Senate side to get this through. And we were close, but we were missing 2 votes. Unfortunately, those 2 votes were 2 votes we could have had from Northern Virginia, so I'd certainly invite people to be involved in that. If we can get that out of committee, that will change and we will be able to pass it. But although some think Senator Saslaw has indicated he may go back to opposing it next year, because he's always been a big opponent of it, and he said this is a one shot. But it's going to be one of the first bills that I introduced in July, and we're able to, the next season, we can introduce bills. And that's going to be one of the first ones that I'm going to introduce, because I've already talked with a whole coalition of parents and PTAs about how we can work to get that education out there. And maybe, I know Kay Corey came to me and said, what are we going to do about George Barker? And I said, 3% within their existing budget. When we kind of let them loose to go through and figure out how to find their savings, they not only found 3%, they found about double that and added to our surplus. So we've continued to reward them, and it's worked out very well. And teachers have logically said to us, well, why aren't we getting that? They said, well, I tried that last year, and so we went back to the drawing board this year. The VEA, Virginia Education Association, did support us on that, but we actually had some strange concerns, or we had some opposition, strange opposition, I say, from our local counties, as they were worried that we'd spend down the local money first and not do the state money. So we're going to go back to the drawing board, figure out how we can do it so that we can incentivize the teachers, because a lot of times they know the savings, where they can be found. And the administrators may not have the incentives or want to find the savings, because sometimes the savings, frankly, might be in the administrative office rather than the classroom. And we want to reward and push more of that money into the classroom. And so we want to get the teachers to be involved like that, just like we did with the state employees. It was so successful. So we're still looking for, some of the people who opposed it weren't opposed to the concept. They were just trying to figure out how we can make it work out. So we're going back to the drawing board on that one. I also got a great idea that came from George Mason on how we can help our veterans who are coming back to go to college here. What happens a lot of times, veterans are in and out going to college because they're called up, they're on active duty for a year, then they come back and they're trying to finish their college degree. And George Mason officials were finding out that oftentimes the semester they were there or the year they were there, they couldn't get the classes they needed to finish their degree. And so it was taking them longer to finish their degrees because of their deployments. So now in all of the colleges, they're going to be working to set up a plan that helps, that works with these students in these particular circumstances, so we can reward these people who are out there fighting for us every day to, when they come back and want to get their education, that we can do everything possible in our school system, in our college systems to do that. I also, in miscellaneous categories, we had a human trafficking bill. If you saw the recent really horrifying stories around the front page of the news here, a very new and troubling development in the human trafficking area is these drug dealers, human traffickers have changed from just going out and, to kind of kidnapping people overseas or getting vulnerable people overseas to come over and they're here trapped, they're here illegally, but they scare them and they start trafficking them and prostituting them and doing all that. Now, they've decided it's a lot cheaper if they just go to our high schools and find troubled young girls who they can get to be involved in this gang activity. And it was gangs that have gotten in, who are out there drug dealing, have now gotten into human trafficking and prostitution rings using young minor girls. And it is extremely disturbing. And where we got the idea for the bill was from a local Fairfax prosecutor came to us and said, well, there are some federal laws we can do. We're concerned we need to strengthen the state laws on what we can do. And it was this particular case we just read about, which is what was the impetus for the bill I had this year, which was to crack down on gang involvement in human trafficking. We arrested, I think there was half a dozen men. It was a 26-year-old guy who was here. He was from the Crips gang, which is an LA gang, which has apparently come now to Fairfax. And they started their drug dealing. And then they would go online, see these girls on Facebook and say, you're pretty, can we get together, meet them at a metro stop, meet them out there, wherever. They even had drivers who would go and pick them up and bring them somewhere and then kind of initiate them into the gang and then trap them in this really sick and troubling lifestyle. They have people down in, they did a lot of this human trafficking down in Old Town, Alexandria. There was a hotel there. You drive into Old Town, there's kind of a crummy hotel. You always wondered what goes on there. This is what goes on there, apparently, part of what goes on there. They were going into this hotel, and this is where many of these girls were, and then they'd march them around different areas in Old Town and just gruesome things. And actually, in a tribute to our school system, one of the girls talked to some school person and told them about she was involved with a guy who was prostituting her and was involved in gangs and things, and she didn't know what to do. And fortunately, whether this was a counselor or a teacher, they called the police in, they got involved, and they were able to really start unraveling all of this. But this is something that we're going to be really trying to do a lot more work on. I serve on the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and Jim Dyke, who's one of our representatives on Metro, is already working with me on how we can go to some of these Metro stops and give people information on, that this is going on and where they can get help. Last year we had a bill, the coalition of us who are working on this human trafficking issue, David Bulova had a bill that we're going to put up more signs, in different public places to warn women, to put it in different languages, and to make sure they know that they can call hotlines, they know where to get help. And you recently had the incidents on Metro where there were issues about sexual harassment, where you may have seen on the news they were handing out flyers telling women about where they can lodge complaints about sexual harassment. And so in that same fashion, we want to be able to make sure these young girls and others are aware of what's going on at some of these Metro stops and get that information out in the same way that we're doing the sexual harassment information. We also had a bill which deals with breast density information. You have a situation where women get their mammograms, and when they get the doctors get the information, oftentimes if you have dense breast tissue, you're more likely either to, they're not sure if you're more likely to get breast cancer and or miss small things that are there because of the density of the breast. So they want to let women know and be aware that they have, that if this is a particular situation you have, that you're aware of that, so you can monitor that more closely, make sure your doctor knows. So this is now a requirement that that women be notified of this. And there might be some additional things we want to do in that area, because the bill didn't really go quite as far as we wanted to go in terms of really making sure women are alerted to this, informed about potential problems there. So that was a bill that the governor, of course, has already signed. And then we still have our budget, which I'll get to, because that's something we're still working on. But those are really the bills that I have focused on, and what the bills that I have introduced, co-sponsored, the bills that I worked on in the committees. Now, of course, there are other bills that you've heard about in the news, and I know those are issues that people also have asked about. And, on these difficult social issues, I have always, having worked for Frank Wolf for years and seeing the divide that there is on this, I know there are good people on many of these social issues on both sides. And I respect and understand that there are good people of good faith who disagree on these issues. And I don't get into the name calling, I don't get into the, castigating people on either side of this, because I appreciate that these are difficult issues. And they're also issues that the Supreme Court has already decided. The Supreme Court has made very clear what the laws are on things like abortion and birth control. And they've made those laws clear for years. And as a lawyer, I understand that those are the laws. But what we deal with in the state legislature is a very narrow area. And what we've dealt with are things like funding of abortion, informed consent, parental consent, limits on very late-term abortions, and things such as, it has always been the practice long before I got there in Virginia that abortions up to 12 weeks can be done in clinics, but after that, then you need to have more safety and do that in hospitals. So this year we did have another informed consent bill that was really the focus of the bill was because women are provided information 24 hours beforehand. This has been the law for over 10 years. And in addition to the information they were already provided, they would be offered the opportunity at their choice to view an ultrasound. Now, the ultrasound, if you look at Planned Parenthood's websites, if you look at what the National Abortion Federation has said, is a routine practice that they're already doing in these clinics. That's the recommended practice by the National Abortion Federation. It's what Planned Parenthood does already. And the bill itself said it will be standard medical practice. When people raise concerns about whether it was an external ultrasound or an internal ultrasound, we changed the bill, and I worked with my colleagues to amend the bill so that it would only be an external, and the focus is on providing that woman with the choice if she chooses to see that picture. Again, I appreciate that people differ on this. What the amendment to the bill was actually an amendment, much like what a Democrat colleague first had proposed, and that's where we ended up on the bill. On another bill that we considered, it was a wrongful death bill for situations where, say, a pregnant woman gets hit by a drunk driver, and as a result of that negligence accident, you lose the baby. Right now, you can sue for your own damages, but you can't sue for the death of that child, obviously a wanted child in these cases. And so what we did, the bill that we had, there were different versions of it. The bill that we passed, which did again have bipartisan support, was a bill that allows for a wrongful death suit. It's a situation where only the mother can bring the wrongful death suit, and she has to make the choice whether she wants to go forward with this for her loss in that type of situation. So, these are the very small amount of the bills that we deal with. The because I, 100% of my time spent on the bills that I've outlined here and focus on the priorities that I've always heard about as a community. And then the biggest issue that really we deal with is the budget, because the budget sets up those priorities of what we need to do. So this year, the House passed their budget. We got all our work done on time. We passed it, and then we had a situation in the Senate where they didn't want to pass a budget in the Senate. And the reason they didn't want to pass a budget was because the Senate is 2020 right now, with the Lieutenant Governor, who's a Republican, passing the deciding vote, determining what the majority will be, which makes it a Republican majority, and that way Republicans a majority, they organize the committees, they decide who's on committees. That's how the system has always worked. And Democrats were not happy with that, and so they figured out that on the budget, actually the Lieutenant Governor cannot cast a deciding vote, so it's 2020. So they thought if they held out on the budget and said, we won't play, we won't pass a budget at all, they did what, I can't remember if it was the Washington Post or another paper called, had it basically a temper tantrum and just said, we're not going to pass a budget. And they refused to pass a budget. So we got to the end of our session and we had passed several House budgets because we tried a second time to send it over there and say, please work with us on a budget. They said no. So now we've had to go into this overtime. Not at the choice of the House, not at the choice of the majority, but because we had sort of a situation here where people, in an effort to get more power, basically wanted to charge you what amounts to $20,000 a day to go back into session for this extra time instead of getting the budget done on time. So now we are working back and forth to get the budget. Actually, the good news is the budget wasn't too different when we actually sat down and hammered it out. One of the things that I'm particularly happy about that's in the budget, because it's something that I've worked on for several years now, is we have 17 more in-state college spots for our students in-state. And this has been an issue and a problem for years. I've introduced bills on it, a number of my other colleagues have. We've worked together on this to get more spots for our kids. So now we'll be funding 1,700 more. JMU, I'm happy to say, is getting close to the 75% goal that we set. Virginia Tech is actually pretty good too. George Mason is great on this, but William & Mary and UVA are sort of the outliers and continue to kind of fight on this. But we continue to introduce this legislation, and then when we can't get the legislation through, then we work through the budget, and we've been able to get more spots there. We've been very aggressive on this. We got spots last year. We have more funding now. We're told that it's an issue of money, but you have a situation where James Madison is able to do it, Virginia Tech's able to do it. We think that William & Mary and UVA should be able to do it too, because you actually have a situation where out-of-state students are able to come to UVA, kids from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, they come down here and they pay less than we have to pay for if our kids go to private institutions. Because if you're out there paying $50,000, $55,000 at a lot of private schools now, instead of paying in-state Virginia, oftentimes you have an out-of-state student who's coming in and paying a lot less than that $55,000. So we want to make sure that our students are put first, and we had a great situation this year with the president of James Madison. We honored this year for a lot of his work, and a number of our colleagues went up to him and said, thank you for what James Madison is doing and getting more in-state students. And he said, that's the right thing to do. And he's exactly right. It's the right thing to do. We honored them for their outstanding public service, and Linwood Rose was the president of the school, but he is exactly right. It's the right thing to do, and that's what we need to be doing in all of our schools. And again, that's going to be one of the first bills that I, again, want to reintroduce when we get to July, because it has at least had the desired effect. UVA and William & Mary do come to us and tell us how they're working hard to try and find more spots, and so we will continue to work with them and do that dance, and just because this is really important, we think, for our kids. Another area that we ended up in the final budget getting more money is initially the governor's budget had taken out what's called the cost to compete money, and we get extra money because we have a higher cost of living up here in Northern Virginia. So I put in a budget amendment on this, a number of us did, to get, for the full cost to compete money to get in there, and we pushed that, in the Appropriations Committee, and then we were able to get more money in on the House budget on the floor, but most importantly, to keep that budget language in there that we would have it, because if you remove that piece of the formula, that would hurt us, so we wanted to have that in there, and we knew as we went back and forth, we could probably get some more money there, so we've gotten more than 2/3 of the money back in there, but most importantly, in the first year, we've gotten almost all the money in, and now we can go back in the second year. Again, I'll be able to put a budget amendment in, get that money up to where it was, so we really won't see a loss there on that. So fortunately, we were able to, again, collaboratively working together. I had, I think a bunch of us in the Northern Virginia delegation put that budget amendment in there, but I'm pretty sure I had a lot of Democrats on that with me, and I know my colleagues heard from all of us in Northern Virginia on that, and that's why we were able to get that in there at the end. We also had more spots for disability, for disabled, handicapped individuals, the Medicaid waivers. The House budget actually historically always adds more money in there. The Senate doesn't, but we've been able to add more money than the governor's budget and keep those numbers up there. We still aren't able to get to where we want to eliminate the backlog that we have on that, but that has been a top priority for years. Our majority leader, Kirk Cox, who's always a conferee on the budget, is very involved in this. And so then we also have tried to have more flexibility for places like the Northern Virginia Training Center, because we have situations there where you all know people who are probably who have family members over there, and when they've been there for years, they may not have a place to come to. They don't have a home where someone can take care of them. And we want to make sure we keep that flexibility there for them, but also have the waivers for those who are not in the center, and make sure that whatever works best for the family, that we're providing those choices and opportunities for everybody. I know there's a lot more on the budget front that I haven't been able to go through, but a lot of that is still being developed. What we will do next week is we go back and vote on what has now been a conference report on the budget, that both the Senate conferees and the House conferees have now come together and agreed on a budget, which we think we'll have 21 votes for. And so we are still getting, the information was kind of coming into my inbox as I was cutting out the door, so I don't have all the details on that. We'll continue to be getting that. We're supposed to get the full report by the end of the week. Then we vote on Tuesday on those budget amendments, and then next Wednesday we vote on various vetoes and issues, changes that the governor might have on some of the bills we've passed. So it's been a full session. We've been very busy on this, and I look forward to continuing to work with all of you. As you can tell from the issues that we've worked on, a lot of these issues are back. You go back and forth and work on. And it's working together, and it's working with that collaboration, working with our leadership on both sides. Working on the Potomac River Basin issue, I found a new friend in Senator Hanger to work with, because when he was a budget conferee, we were able to find out that he was there. Wanted to make sure we could work together on that issue. On some of the school issues now, we've got to go back to the drawing board on where we can find some more issues to get that King's Dominion bill taken away. But this is, a collaborative process. I appreciate everything that you all help in making that a collaborative process, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Would you like to take some questions?
Sure.
You had mentioned the state universities and the 75% number. Is that a recommendation on the House's part, or is that's not written in stone, but you would like them to achieve the 75%?
Right, that's the 75% has been what we wanted to put into law, and what we haven't been able to get that bill through. So we've been pushing that issue and trying to increase the support for that, and again, kind of make a campaign for that issue, and then get more money so that they don't have, that's been an excuse. We provide more money, they still come back and tell us, well, no, we can't do it. But now we've had the great example of George Mason, of Virginia Tech, and of other universities. So now as we're narrowing this down and trying to get UVA and William & Mary to come around, we're hopeful that we can continue to press that case. But 75% has been the goal. That's where we started out. I'd like to actually see it a little higher. In North Carolina, California, some other states, they do have it higher than that.
Do you know what the percentages are, or a ballpark?
I think they've been under 70 at times. So we miss, and so it's a lot lower than we want. And everybody knows somebody, and probably a lot of you have experienced it, where you hear about kids with a 4.0 with perfect SATs, and then they're not getting into UVA or William & Mary. And a lot of those kids are in Northern Virginia. So we want to make sure that they have those opportunities. And that's certainly something, particularly in these tough economic times, that makes a huge difference whether you're paying an in-state college spot or an out-of-state private university. Can make the difference between whether some families can afford to send their kids to school. So that's why we do want to put our kids first on that and not push them out of state to where they can't afford to go to a $50,000 a year university.
Do you want to go ahead and talk about that bill 1248 and the fact that it changes the way that the localities can control?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of discussion going on in that. That is one of the areas where I believe the governor has some amendments. I was not able to actually call in to Secretary Connaughton to talk with him about that because I know there's disagreement on what the bill does or what it's perceived to do versus what it does. And there are some amendments there. So I would be happy to get back to you when I see all the amendments and have a discussion with Secretary Connaughton. On the one issue, there was a study that was particularly going to look for the location, actually it was up in Loudon on a cross river. That study was a number of us saw. That did not get out this year and was not welcome, given all the other things we have to work on. That died a quick death, and the same concern that killed that study is being brought to bear on that. So I will continue to work with you on that because I agree we don't want to have control over those things taken away from us.
Ms. Comstock, you started out this evening by saying jobs were number one, but House Bill number one was the personhood bill, which you supported, and which, by all accounts, is more extreme than even legislation that was rejected in Mississippi. Do you want to put Virginia in a pot with Mississippi when it comes to women's reproductive rights?
Actually, that was the wrongful death bill. The version of it that passed was a different bill that came out of the Senate, which did the same that what that bill was intended to do, was to be able to bring a wrongful death case. The process in Virginia, the way these bills work, is when you go in and get a bill drawn up, if it violates the Constitution, which they put what's called a gray sheet on it. This bill didn't have a gray sheet. I'm not on that committee. That wasn't a bill that I sponsored. But the bill that we passed that did deal with the wrongful death issue was a bill that was bipartisanly supported, and I think better did what that bill was designed to do and intended to do. But that's what was passed, was a wrongful death bill, and that's what that bill was intended to be. But I think the bill that ultimately passed was better with that.
How are efforts going to get the Northern Virginia delegation working together to get more transportation funding for Northern Virginia?
Good question. Well, we did, as you know, last year we had a $4 billion transportation bill. So that was a good start. We also did an audit of VDOT, which found $1 billion that wasn't being used, that was sitting around while we were sitting in traffic. So that began to start. What we did this year was we did have a bill that would allow us to keep a half cent more of our sales tax here in Northern Virginia so that we could have $100 million. if it was 100 or 150 million, have more money that would stay here in Northern Virginia for our transportation needs, instead of sending that same money down to Richmond, and then we would just get a trickle back on that. So I did support that. I think that was a bill that Tom Rust introduced last year. I think it was his bill again this year, which was designed, even though we don't have a formula change yet, but would keep more of our transportation dollars here for us to be able to control. So I do support that, because when you, just like with the congestion bills that we passed, when you get more transportation dollars here in Northern Virginia and in Fairfax and Loudoun, it not only helps us here in Fairfax and Loudoun, it helps the entire state. Because when you solve those congestion problems, have more economic development, have more economic prosperity here, we develop at a much faster rate than other parts of the state. We have a much bigger multiplier effect, and that benefits the entire state, because that still means more money that's going down to Richmond, because we are promoting those, that prosperity, that way to, get our, get transportation moving. So there are a lot of solutions on transportation, like telework things and things that don't necessarily involve huge tax increases. There was a proposal, as there have been for years, to have some pretty dramatic increases in the gas tax. And there was a strong feeling, really on a bipartisan basis, people throughout the state, that when we're looking at $4 gas, again, $4 a gallon gas, that we did not want to increase taxes on working families, because that's a tax, particularly up here in Northern Virginia, that's a tax on working families. That's a tax on low-income families who tend to have more two-earner workers. They have to travel further a distance. There was a news story early on about the gas tax. I think Delegate Serville had introduced a gas tax, and they went into his district, which was Mount Vernon area, I think that was the Maine area, and they talked to people, just on the road, and they unanimously said, geez, I can't make it as it is. This would really be harmful to our families. I'm a two-earner family. I gotta, my kids have to get to work. I gotta get the kids to soccer. And they showed this one woman, walking with her gas can to the gas station because she said, I'm trying to make it till tomorrow because I don't get paid till tomorrow, or whatever the situation was. And they actually said, as gas prices go up, people tend to run out of gas more because they literally can't pay those bills. And when you look at gas prices have doubled over the past 3 years, and last time I filled up it was $65. That is a huge tax burden already on families, and so we didn't want to add that additional tax this time. But I do think bills like what Delegate Tom Rust had, and efforts to do the congestion relief, and then still working to see. I think the one good thing about a new dynamic that we have in the Northern Virginia delegation is we are a much bigger part of the caucus, the majority caucus in Richmond, and they know that this is a big issue for us, and that's why we did get $150 million more for the Dulles Rail project, and that was something that the governor worked out last fall that I've supported. The only condition that's on it is that condition that actually before my bill passed, that both Congressman Wolf and Governor McDonald said we've got to take the project labor mandates off this project because we don't want to start putting money into a project that unnecessarily escalates because of union costs that can sometimes drive up the cost of a project by 10-20%. So we wanted to make sure we had our workers in there and then invest this money. And I support putting more money in there if we can, but the $150 million will be released once the Airports Authority complies with our law. That will buy down tolls for 2 years, and then we can work to get more money in there. We want to make sure the overall cost of the project is not cost prohibitive because we want to have the tolls being low. And when Congressman Wolf first went out on this issue he was the first one to raise it. He started getting union protesters showing up, attacking him. They showed up at his church. They showed up at private homes when he was there, and they started attacking him for finding, if we're just saying, let's have a level playing field, let's have everyone compete, and let's make sure both union and non-union workers can compete on a level playing field. And that's why I worked with Congressman Wolf on this bill to make sure in Virginia we were doing everything to help him, because he has a couple of audits that are going to be coming out in the middle of May. And I don't know if you get to look at any of this at CRS, but the audits that GAO is doing on this project have already turned up some troubling things, we're told. The audit on the Airports Authority management and contracting practices started out with just a few people doing the audit, and now they're up to 20. And it was supposed to be done in April, and now all they're able to do is an interim report in mid-May. So what we have said is we want to see that report before we invest additional money, because we're open, and obviously Congressman Wolf has been the leader on transportation projects in our community, and to have people attacking the person who's brought more money to Northern Virginia, and protesting at his church because of his asking for a level playing field is not something that's been very constructive for the debate. But we're trying to iron this out so we can move forward. But we've got to find out what things went wrong, perhaps in phase one, to make sure we don't repeat any of those mistakes, to make sure that we can find any cost savings that we didn't realize in phase one that we can now realize in phase two by learning from this. So this audit should be very helpful and instructive for us so that we can save money for the taxpayers, and that's the goal of Congressman Wolf doing that. And he's invited our supervisors and others to come in and meet with the auditors, and so I think we'll be able to do it a little after May 15th, and I know a number of my colleagues are looking forward to that, because we think we'll be able to get more helpful information for you on that particular project, which I do support, because I think it's important for our economic vitality in the area. We want to get it out to Loudon. The Loudon Board of Supervisors have said, if there's a project labor agreement on it, we're not going to participate. And the board knows that, and they're thumbing their nose at them also. So it's been the state law, the governor has said that's what they need to do, take the mandates off, take the preferences off, and Loudon County. So you have all the funding partners have said, let's play nice, let's let Virginia workers be involved here and have a level playing field. And if we all work together, this project should be able to move forward. Yes.
I would also suggest something that's strongly needed on that, is to have a decent, reliable cost-benefit analysis, which I think so far all of them I have seen have flunked.
Well, I know one of the audits I believe is being done.
And an auditor isn't necessarily the best way to show up with a cost-benefit analysis.
Well, I think there's an analysis on the toll structure that has been done, so they're looking at how that's going to work out too, because obviously, particularly of importance to my district, to my community, certainly to areas in Vienna that front that area, is that the study they have right now says if they raise the tolls as they're expected to on the current trajectory, that you will have something like 15 to 25% of the traffic drop off. Now, if they drop off of the toll road, we know they're going to be going into our neighborhoods. That might mean instead of going down a widened Route 7 or going around to get on the toll road, they'll come down Georgetown Pike, which we don't need any more traffic there. Or they'll be going into Vienna neighborhoods and cutting through. They'll be cutting through our neighborhoods in McLean. So we want to make sure we have the most cost-efficient way to keep people out on those roads, to keep them out on a widened Route 7, and not to be doing damage to our neighborhoods, because and that's something that when I've been to the town hall meetings on this, unfortunately, I'm going to hold more, because the county had some, and I know they advertised them, but only, I believe, was either 60 or 80 people have only turned out for these town hall meetings so far.
Well, the county's not willing to answer any questions on that issue.
Well, there's a lot of answers that they don't know yet. So after these audits come out, I've asked the county, and I do want to distinguish between the Airports Authority Board and the staff, because the staff have been very helpful to work with. Privately, many of the staff often tell me, yes, this board is driving us crazy. Yes, the board is doing irrational things that makes no sense if you wanted to move forward on this project. we wish so-and-so wouldn't do these things. From Jack Potter, who's the head of it, on down, they have raised, staff is not happy about this. So I always do like to distinguish between the staff, because the staff is working hard trying to get this job done for you. And they have a difficult board to work with. And one of the bills on that front that Congressman Wolf introduced was, and passed, President Obama signed, was a bill to give Virginia more representation on the Airports Authority Board. Now, you'd think that would be something that Virginians would like, right? Well, once that was passed, the board, before it was passed, the board started fighting it. Because there's Maryland and D.C. people who, again, want to get those jobs to go elsewhere than Virginia, who started fighting it. And then even after the bill was passed, congressmen, they said, we're not going to implement it. They went and spent our taxpayer dollars, money, to go to an outside law firm to say, we can't comply with your law, President Obama and Congressman Wolf. So then they came to us in the legislature and said, you have to pass a law to help implement Congressman Wolf's law. And then when we passed that, we had people on the board who came down and opposed passing the bill. So we really have people who were trying to really, you have a situation where some board members who actually, their terms have already expired. One of the board members who's been fighting this, a pretty simple thing, a board that complies with the law. Not too much to ask for. People who recognize when you pass a law, whether you like it or not, that you're going to comply with it. So hopefully we will have 2 more board members sitting on there. Todd Stottlemyre was able to already go on because another board member stepped down. Todd has been chairman of the Fairfax Chamber. He's a strong supporter of Rail to Dulles. He's trying to work in there. Tom Davis is on there. But I hear from members who are on the board who've been Virginia appointees who say, there's some people on this board who are just, if they can't get it for their union guys, they want to kill the project. And we're trying to find the way through the middle so that we can keep this project going, work with Congressman Wolf, work with the governor, keep the project going forward in a way that benefits Virginians. Yes.
Yeah, so I have to agree with what you said, and some of the stuff is quite distressing. Number one, I know Congressman Wolf pretty well, and Congressman Wolf actually supports increasing federal workers in the Defense Department because they're less expensive to use than the contractors. Congressman Wolf also, I'm president of a union. Congressman Wolf was in fact supported. We gave Congressman Wolf money. The Republican endorsed candidate for school board in Dranesville was not only endorsed by both unions, but both unions did contribute. So it's not like unions. And in Virginia's a right to work state. No one has to join a union. The critical part of the budget is to increase, like everyone else in Fairfax County, wants to increase the contribution from the state. Give us more of our tax dollars back. It was $150 million. Even, it wasn't the project labor agreement. Everyone else, at least I thought, said $300 million, and at least I was told that you voted against it. I want to ask.
I would like to address that.
But could I just finish, and then I, because I also want to say that the project labor agreements, a lot of businesses like project labor agreements. The union preference is a different issue. Project labor agreements don't have to have unions. The Wilson Bridge was built with a project labor agreement. So was the, Dulles first phase.
Voluntary.
Well, if you had put the $300 million in with a voluntary, I guarantee you that the Democrats would absolutely support it, and it wouldn't have any kind of quote union preference for that.
Well, we should have had you as a budget counsel.
But what do project labor agreements do? They actually control costs. There are a lot of businesses that like it. They control costs. They make sure there's a workforce. They make sure the workforce is documented. There are no illegal people on the workforce. And frankly, as far as I know, the people working on Phase 1 of Dulles, yes, a lot of them live in Prince William County. I have no evidence, and in Loudoun County and further out, but I have no evidence to suggest that it's full of people working from, who live in D.C. or live in Maryland. But that,
question. This is just a Q&A period.
Okay. But I'm saying this constructively. We've met, and I'm saying this constructively. The most important thing that I'm saying is
please go back to Richmond and get it to 300 million.
Well, I mentioned my bill, as I mentioned, is a level playing field. So the unions, you can't prohibit a project labor agreement, but you can't force them. So all the things you said about it, and this is why Sharon Bullivan, Sean Connaughton, and Scott York all wrote a letter to the Airports Authority Board saying, please take the preferences off, please take the mandates. You can do a voluntary one the way we did on phase one. Now, I should point out, even with a voluntary on phase one, less than half the jobs are in Virginia. So that's the reality on the job situation. On the 300 million, as I mentioned, supported the 150 million. I do support finding a way to have more resources there. What happened is this 300 million did not come up in any vote that we had independently in the House. This was put into the Senate budget. When the Senate voted on it, they voted to put it in there. And then what happens is the Senate took out some things that we liked in our House budget. They put in other things. So everybody understood when we went down to vote on the budget that you were going to have the Senate and House budget go into conference. And that we weren't just going to go down there and accept the Senate budget as is, since it cut out a lot of the things. It didn't have, I know there were obviously differences there, so you wanted to have that collaborative process go back and forth so that you would have a vote on it. So there was no independent vote on the 300 million. It was a vote to put the budget into conference, so then we would all discuss there, and there was no relenting on the project labor agreement preference that I'm aware of in the budget. If that's the case, that would be great, and I think that's obviously something that everyone's been trying to work on. So,
would you be able to take one more question?
Okay.
You've obviously done a lot of innovative thinking for the benefit of our area, and I appreciate that. You also involved in a tremendous amount of bills, more than I remember having been involved in the past, previously with prior legislators, and that really seems to help our area, I'm sure. Could you describe the budget process that occurred when Governor McDonnell came into office? If I remember correctly, the prior administration had been unable to balance the budget, and yet once McDonnell came in, the budget was balanced. Could you describe some of the factors that were involved in that process that enabled you to balance the budget?
Sure. Well, 3 years ago when we came in, we had a deficit that was in the billions and recommendations for tax increases to close a lot of that. We also had what was a $120 million cut to our schools up here that, again, we all put budget amendments in and bipartisanly opposed that, and we were able to reverse that. We had that $1 billion that was in VDOT and not being spent, and we had, closed the rest stops and we reopened the rest stops and did things like that. So we did have a very dire situation. Right now we have, in addition to being number one for jobs, we have one of the lowest unemployment rates. We're at 5.7, although with the dip down we may have a little bit better. Here in Fairfax we're lower than that. We also have had just been named the number one place to make a living because we are focusing on jobs as our number one bill and our number one project. So, no matter what the numbers of the bills are, that's our number one priority. And I think, as I've laid out in the bills that I've worked on with my colleagues on a bipartisan basis, we're trying to get that economy turned around. Because if you don't get the economy turned around, you're not going to have the money that we need for all of these, for our schools, for K through 12. I know our new budget gets additional money, quite a bit of additional funding into K through 12. Lowering class size in K through 3 is a priority. Giving more flexibility for the localities so they can, some of the mandates that they had, they're going to have a little bit more control over where they want to spend it. Say if they need more help with putting it into STEM rather than in preschool, they can have some, they can decide what they want to put it on and giving them more control. And that's what we were trying to do with the King's Dominion bill. It's all about giving us more local control, giving us more of our tax dollars. And I think when we have more of our tax dollars here in Northern Virginia, whether it's our transportation dollars staying here with the sales tax, we end up creating more prosperity for the state and helping other parts of the state that don't have the kind of opportunities and advantages that we have here. Because that really does expand down. Like something like these tech jobs, they're now going down the valley, they're out in Southwest, and because of things like telework and the ability to have job locations all over, these data center bills, this is something that people really like, the data centers in the rural areas, because this is going to be a big chunk of change they can get if a data center comes down there and builds there and takes, because they've got open space where they can put this on, and this is going to be great for them. So we want to, that's I think the colleague who sponsored that with me, I believe, in the Senate, is from an area that's largely, a lot of rural areas where he wanted to get these folks in there because, for people who didn't have the opportunities, he wanted to get both job opportunities and then money from the local taxes. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Delegate Comstock. Thank you.